Any one of us, I don't care who you are, any one of us could find themselves in the situation I found myself in. And we might say, oh, I would never do that. I could never. You don't know what could happen. And you could find yourself in a situation where you are incarcerated. And I guarantee, particularly if you were prior to that a professional working within the ecosystem of criminal justice, as they refer to it, all of your ideals would change, because you're now having the one experience that everybody and anybody who is actually presiding over people that they relegate to a prison in the current conditions that prisons are in our country today, they would be using their voice just like I'm using mine. And as a woman, which added to my experience, as a mother, I had 2 young adult daughters, college age and in college. When I went to prison, one was out, the other one was still in. And then I had a 12-year-old at the time, my daughter, 3 daughters, and my son. I also have my son, my military son, who is my stepson, but my son, he's on the older end as well. But my youngest children were 12 years old and 5 months old. I had a husband, I had parents, I was part of a family that was part of a community that we were very engaged and connected to. So to go 2 states away, I was sentenced to serve 2 years in a federal prison for wire fraud. The experience of removing people from their communities, from their families. I was breastfeeding my son. He was 5 months old. I was older when I had him. I was 45 years old when I had my son. I was sent to a prison. The judge knew. The prosecutor even had just the audacious insensitivity to say she knew she was probably going to prison. She shouldn't have decided to have a child at this time, which is just nonsensical, of course. And you don't get to choose the right for me to choose to have a child. But in addition to just the audacity of those kinds of thoughts, I went through an experience where the original prosecutor on my case was a woman who was pregnant. And the difference in the treatment of the two of us, me as the defendant, she as the prosecutor, she had to leave the case because naturally she was getting close to her due date. Well, I was dealing with an incredible, immense amount of stress, which affects everything in our bodies. And if you're carrying a child, that child as well. But the way that I was treated by a court system, like there was no comparison to the care and all of the shifting of calendars and schedules that had to happen for this woman to go off and be comfortable and go into her maternity leave, and to shift my case over to a prosecutor, a man who would say things like he said in regard to having no empathy for what I was also going through, same condition as a woman, and to be so callous to say, you knew you were probably going to go to prison, you shouldn't have had this child. These are the things that resonated with me, my life experiences, growing up in the most incarcerated corridor in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, seeing most of my friends didn't have the opportunity to be raised in such a progressive family as I was, who made a point of bringing the education of being African American in the United States into the dinner table every evening, and also seeing my friends in the level of disruption very early as a young girl, because their fathers were, mostly it was men then, were being, incarcerated. Going to prison, it was as if everything that my parents had taught us, everything that my grandparents had talked to us about, all of the travel we did as children to introduce us to the absolute need to understand the historical and political context of Black people in America and around the world, all of that just came crashing in when I sat up and just was like, my God, this is what they're talking about. And why is it that we disproportionately represent who's in this prison. Why are all these women Black? Why are they all, serving a conspiracy sentence, which is turned into a study? Like we've actually worked on over the years since coming out and developing our work at the National Council. We've taken all of these things that kind of like all these questions that we asked, and we turned it into the work that we do at the National Council. And we started to work on that. Like just 2 weeks ago, our senior legal counsel, Catherine Shevchenko, she testified with 2 formerly incarcerated women that are in our membership in front of the U.S. Sentencing Commission to have an impact on creating change about how the conspiracy laws are used in sentencing, because they affect women in a very significant way. But for adding conspiracy to whatever the case is, predominantly drug cases, 99% of the women that were serving drug cases that were in that prison with me, which was everybody, it was one other lawyer and 3 medical doctors. Everybody else was there for drugs. They were all also sentenced under conspiracy. And in most of their cases, but for the ability to charge someone with conspiracy, which holds you accountable for everything that the kingpin is responsible for. It casts a net over all of the defendants in that case. And they're held responsible for everything. And for women, that is terrible. The result of that end up with so many women as a result of the war on drugs, or what we call the crack epidemic or chemical warfare against Black and brown communities, that led to just thousands of women being removed from their children, removed from their communities because they were the girlfriend of a guy, or they were, they answered the phone, or they might have known something was going on, or maybe their brother sold drugs. They lived in the same house, but she didn't really have anything to do with it. But she opened the door and let his friends in when they came by. That's enough. That was enough to get her a full 10-year mandatory minimum sentence in the federal system because of conspiracy. So we knew that was something that we had to work on creating change. And it took us 10 years since coming out, 10 plus years. But we sat in front of the Sentencing Commission 2 weeks ago, and we talked about that issue. And that's after we have done a 5-year study on conspiracy with women incarcerated by sending in the surveys of women who were incarcerated. Because being in prison, I got to see firsthand how much that affected in a very bad way women, and how they were landing in huge numbers where, but for conspiracy, the Justice Department could not justify the indictment, the prosecution, and the sentencing of these women. They were all doing 10-year mandatory minimum sentences. And if you don't know what 10 years can do to a family, the level of family disruption, the level of economic disruption that a 10-year prison sentence causes. I mean, my God, 2-year sentence just wreaked havoc on my family.